Hi, and welcome to the VieSID Press-release. With this short presentation, we want to report on the dental literature published in December 2021. We have chosen articles from a selected list of journals that we think might be of interest to the VieSID community. So let's begin. We start with an article by Santana Mora et al. In the Annals of Anatomy. They investigated the relationship between unilateral habitual mastication and temporomandibular disorders. In particular, they considered 24 adults with long-term unilateral TMD and assessed their chewing pattern by means of kinesiography. They found that habitual unilateral chewing was prevalent in the sample in 17 out of 24 participants and occurred mostly on the affected side. The condylar path angle was steeper on the affected side than on the unaffected side, and the lateral guidance was flatter on the affected side in all of the 24 participants. However, the use of an heterogeneous TMD sample in the study might act as a confounding factor. In fact, the patients considered were diagnosed with different disorders, including myalgia or arthralgia or disc derangement. Thus, a study focusing on a more homogeneous sample, possibly compared to a control group, would be even more informative. The Japanese Dental Science Review reports on an article by Vistoso, Monreal and colleagues, which focuses on machine learning for assisting the diagnosis of orofacial pain. These authors describe their ongoing machine learning project aimed at building a patient database and producing suitable algorithms for the diagnosis of orofacial pain. They also illustrated the challenges of machine learning in medicine. In particular, they stressed the fact that the input data should be of good quality, meaning that the cases used for the learning phase of the algorithm must be of good clinical quality. Generally, the input data consists of medical notes and is therefore in a narrative form rather than expressed as checklist, which is in fact a format more suitable for machine learning. Also, the number of patients must be high enough, with a minimum threshold that the author set at 100, which is difficult to achieve in short time in the case of rare diseases. Additionally, some conditions can have a high number of differential diagnoses, as in fact orofacial pain can be explained by over 100 types of ailments. Comorbidity is a further complexity factor. So these are the outcomes of their ongoing machine learning project. They have selected the most frequent ailments, consisting in masticatory and cervical myalgia or myofascial pain, followed by arthralgia, capsulitis, internal derangement with reduction, and osteoarthritis of the TMJ. For each of the possible differential diagnoses, risk factors were evaluated, the importance of the variables was computed, and eventually the performance of the algorithm was tested and tuned. So this seems to be quite an endeavor in terms of workload, but also machine learning for assisting medical diagnosis seems to be, to me at least, a minefield of possible biases. One of the main concerns that I would raise, and that in fact I share with the authors, is that machines need to learn from the best data. But it is renowned that there are still many uncertainties in the field of orofacial pain, especially in relation to the most effective treatments and assessment of their outcomes. So best of luck to Vistoso, Monreal and colleagues for this exciting and very challenging project. The Journal of Oral Rehabilitation published articles analyzing tongue function. Gu et al. Considered a large sample of early and late adolescents and adults for a total of 365 individuals and analyzed maximum occlusal force, maximum tongue pressure, and tongue-to-lip motor function. A significant result was obtained for the maximum occlusal force, which is shown here, which was similar in early adolescent males and females and remained stable in females, but it increased with age in males. Maximum tongue pressure and tongue-to-lip motor function seem to present a similar pattern, but with a lower degree of variation. In a second paper, Nakao and colleagues also measured tongue performance in 45 adults in relation to age, fat infiltration, which they assessed by means of a Dixon magnetic resonance imaging, and ability to pronounce the ta and ka sounds. And they found that the higher the fat infiltration rate, the lower the pressure the tongue can exert, as is illustrated in their plot A. However, it is also true that fat rate is higher in older individuals, and for this you can check their plot B. Thus, it is possible that the decrease in maximum tongue pressure is caused by either age or fat infiltration or both. Instead, plots C and D show that the percentage of fat in the tongue is not linearly correlated with the coordination of the tongue-to-lip movements. Goldstein has written a letter to the editor of the Journal of Prosthodontics focused on evidence-based dentistry and the challenges and limitations proper of this approach. The first challenge he discussed is shared with all fields of research investigating relationship between phenomena and attempting to understand causality. Here are definitions of keywords such as association, meaning mutual relationship or connection between things. Although in the common language association and correlation are used interchangeably, in statistics correlation measures the strength of an association. If we find an association between two factors, A and B, then we have three possibilities. So either A causes B or B causes A. There could be an additional factor also, C, which is causal to both A and B. So there is a possible further explanation to the correlation between A and B. Their correlation could be spurious. There are in fact books and websites dedicated to spurious correlation. Here report 1 indicated that suicides by hanging, strangulation and suffocation correlate almost perfectly to the US spending on science, space and technology. So this example alone is a clear call for caution in the interpretation of statistical outcomes. A further challenge is common to all human sciences because if it is difficult to establish causality, it is even more so in studies that focus on humans. In fact, as stated by Lucas and McMichael, there are obvious, practical and ethical limitations in the study of human beings, where causation is even more difficult to prove. So how can difficulties be overcome? Well, I guess that some cannot, but Goldstein cited Sackett, who invites us to open-mindedness in research. He says, the question being asked determines the appropriate research architecture, strategy and tactics, not tradition, authority, experts, paradigms, or school of thought. Also, he reminds us that evidence-based medicine is not restricted to randomized clinical trials or systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Rather, it requires seeking out the best external evidence. Goldstein reported on cases in which, however, the best evidence is not available because of various drawbacks in the research approaches, which we can call our challenge number 3 in evidence-based dentistry. One of these cases relevant for this presentation is that of mediotrusive interferences. Are mediotrusive interferences causal to TMD? According to Goldstein, in the literature, there is a positive or compelling evidence for or against because of two main reasons: lumping on various disorders into one unspecific diagnosis of TMD, and the confusion between mediotrusive contacts and mediotrusive interferences. In addition, he mentioned the case of highly biased systematic reviews focusing on occlusion and TMD, such as that published in the Journal of Oral Rehabilitation by Manfredini and colleagues in 2017. Manfredini and colleagues ignored the statistical association they found for mediotrusive interferences and other occlusal features, and excluded a number of articles from the review because they were not randomized. Still, they could be informative. A further difficult point in evidence-based dentistry is the translation of the findings into clinical application or therapies. Of course, this is not always possible or straightforward. Also, Goldstein pointed out that even in the absence of scientific evidence, the clinician is under the duress of making clinical decisions for the patients, and with all the treatment, because causality has not been scientifically determined, might be unethical and harmful to the patient. In conclusion, there are many challenges in carrying out medical research on humans, and there are plenty of pitfalls along the way. Luckily, Goldstein leaves us with several hints for improvement, including accuracy and the use of caution, good sense, and open-mindedness. And talking about seeking out the best external evidence, I want to report on an anthropological work published in PLOS ONE by Sylvester, Kulmer, and Hilton, in which the occlusal pattern of the lower molars of two different archaeological samples was investigated. In particular, these authors consider one medieval sample and one post-industrial revolution sample from England. These were characterized by similar diets, mostly consisting of bread and small quantities of meat, vegetables, or dairy products. However, the flour used by the pre-industrial population for making bread was obtained using the whole grain and stone mills, and therefore was more coarse than that produced by the post-industrial population, which was able to make a much finer flour. The occlusal pattern was investigated using the occlusal fingerprint analysis, a virtual approach for the quantification of occlusal wear developed by Kulmer and colleagues in 2009. Thus, occlusal surfaces were marked so as to highlight the wear facets originated from buccal phase 1 and lingual phase 1 and 2, and by tip crushing. The sample from the post-industrial revolution times showed a decrease of buccal phase 1 and lingual phase 1, and therefore a relative increase of lingual phase 2. In the simulation of the chewing pattern in selected specimens, it appeared that the medieval individuals showed power stroke of the chewing cycle with the presence of a more pronounced lateral movement that are not visible in the post-industrial revolution sample. While this chewing gape showed at the bottom is surely more familiar to you, as it matches those that are represented in several dental books, including the masticatory organ by Slavicek. So, what are the take-home messages of this work? Modern human dentition and mastication have undergone evolutionary and secular changes because of changes in diet and food technology. Furthermore, this paper clearly conveys the message that occlusal surfaces as shaped by wear and the masticatory function are associated. Can we speculate about causality? Well, already in 1984, Smith noticed that agriculturalists showed steeper, more oblique occlusal facets than hunter-gatherers, and claimed that there was an association with the consumption of processed and cooked grains. Clinical feeding studies, such as that by Laird et al. Of 2020, found that tougher and harder foods are chewed with a larger lateral component of jaw movements than soft foods. So, thus, it is reasonable to assume that harder and tougher foods requiring a higher shearing component for comminution cause the occlusal surfaces to become flatter, in turn allowing movements with larger lateral components. So, with this, I end the presentation, and I invite you to contact us in case you want to know more about our activities. Otherwise, be ready for next press release. Best wishes to all.